Hi and welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Today I'd like to teach you a cheeky little single wire earring project. Now if you haven't had any experience in hammering your wire, this is a great little introductory project to get you used to the feeling of how wire changes when you do apply strengthening and work hardening by nature of a hammer. So today I'm working with 0.8mm gauge wire, and the reason I choose this, although it is significantly lighter, is because most piercings that go through the standard ear hole will happily accept a 0.8mm gauge wire without too much problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply some hardening by nature of hammering on that wire on a block. The tools that I'm using today along with my 0.8mm gauge wire are a lightweight brass-headed hammer. I'm also going to be using a steel block. That's got some disgusting stuff on the bottom, we won't use that side, and a rubber block which helps slightly deaden the sound when we're using that in our workshop. We're also going to be using some flush cutters and a burr cup device, which is one of these. And what this does is just chamfer the naughty sharp edges off the end of the wire that goes through the piercing hole. So that just makes sure that there are no sharp edges that could cut your skin as it goes through that piercing. You could also use, if you prefer, wet and dry sandpaper or a sanding block just to get those edges nice and smooth and to make sure that it's comfortable during insertion into that piercing. So to get started, I've got my two segments of 0.8mm gauge silver plated, in this instance copper wire, and this is the type of design that we're going to be making. I've just added a very simple wrapped loop bead onto this. It's a beautiful rainbow moonstone on a silver plated headpin that's had a 3-turn wrapped loop added on. Now you could have a single base wire that you change out charms onto. You could use, this is the part of a bracelet toggle fastening, so you could pop those on. That looks quite cute as well if you've got a pair of those and you've perhaps used the bar segment for creating cufflinks or something else that you've got going on, or you've just got odd ones of these hanging around. You can always use them up. So those are ideas for adding on, but this is what we're looking to create today. Now to begin with, we've got around about 6 to 7 inches of wire, and we're going to start by coiling. Now I tend to have them both in the same kind of situation all the way through the demonstration, so that I can make them nice and symmetrical, keeping it even, so that, I mean, obviously when they're on opposite ears, a little bit of difference doesn't really matter, but it's great if they're of similar size and nature. So I'm going to start off with my round nose pliers, and I'm going to generate a nice open coil. I'm just going to flip that wire over so that I'm working with the curvature that comes from the wire having been stored on a reel. So I'm going to start with a closed loop at the centre of my coil, like so. Very gently, just moving, opening and closing those round nose pliers until I get that perfect loop at the centre. I'm then going to continue around little by little in an open loop design. Now you can make this as open or as tight as you like, as long as that last circuit is quite open so that you can get your dangly bead or whatever it is you're going to use to enhance the design. As long as there's space for that to go on, it's all fair. So that's gone a little bit tighter than I wanted it to. So I'm just going to continue around until I have a good couple of loops spiralling out from that central section. And when I think that I've got enough going on, now for my eye, I kind of like to see that segment where we started our coil to be in the upright position. That's just me, it doesn't really matter. I just think in terms of an aesthetic, it's quite attractive. So I'm just going to manually move that until it sits as I want it to sit. So at this stage, I would operate the pliers again, and I would get as similar as I could on a second piece. So I'm just going to roughly start that off to show you how you could get that to match up. Create your loop, switch over, and then you can just keep them quite close together while you ascertain if they're going to be similar enough. And then once you have two of those, you would operate them section by section so that you know that they're going to match. So I'm going to discard this now, but if you do this little by little, you'll make sure that you get a pair of earrings rather than some mismatched coils. So once you've got two of those identical or near as identical as you care to make it on the go, just going to make sure that you're happy with that design. I would then pop in with a round form. The very, very smallest point on a ring mandrel is useful, or you could use the lid of a nail varnish or something similar, or even a pen if you wanted something a bit smaller. I think actually I might just use my clay roller. I'm going to pop that in to help generate that lovely over the top section that actually goes through the ear. And again, I would bring my second section in to make sure that those match up neatly and appropriately. And if that's too large, you can always draw that down and just make sure that you're happy with the overall aesthetic. So this is where it will sit in the ear. So we're going to bring the tail down beneath. Not completely. If you imagine that we have a line running from where it sits in the piercing through the centre, we're not looking to come all the way down to the 6 o'clock position, more like 4:30. I know that's quite explicit. And then we're just going to allow that to straighten out slightly using the heat of the finger there before putting that little piercing kick on, like so, and then cutting away the excess. So it's nice to have that little piercing kick there. It looks attractive, and it just means that when you're inserting it through the piercing, you can get that to kind of flow as it goes. Now I have a burr cup device here, which is a wooden handle, and then we've got a little burr in here, and that just has tiny little teeth inside so that we can remove any jagged edges from that end section. As I say, if you don't have a burr remover device, then you can obviously use papers or go through your grits or even use a nail file to get that a little bit smoother so that it's comfortable in wear. So at this stage I would be ensuring that I had two almost identical pieces to work with and make sure that I'm happy with the shape. Maybe take them up for size, that they're not too long. You don't want it so that it's sort of dragging on, well, I don't know, maybe you do. I personally don't want it so that it's dragging on my shoulders. I'd like it to kind of dangle somewhere up there. And then we're going to hammer segment by segment to make sure that it retains its shape during wear. So coming back down to the board, I'm just going to bring the block into the centre. And what we're looking to do is harden, by nature of hammering, the loop in the centre and almost all the way up to around about here, so just before it would sit in the piercing. Now I have found that when you are hammering, even though you try desperately to come down onto the surface as flat as possible, we quite often tend to tilt a little way one way or the other. And what can happen here is you will disturb more material on one side than on the other, and then it starts to bow away and you lose the form that you're looking to keep. So what we're going to do, and I'm not going to be able to talk during this, is we're going to firmly hold down the form before we hit around, preferably not onto the finger, but around the finger, and we're just looking to hit onto the loop at this stage, and we're going to try and strike the hammer down evenly from above. So during that first section, what we've done is we've flattened and work hardened a segment of the coil. We're going to inspect it in a moment to see if everything is exactly where we want it to be still, because at this stage there's a little bit of flexibility to move that before we move on to hammering the second half of that central coil. So let's take a look. I'm actually quite happy with how that's looking, so I'm going to now hold on to the hammered section. I'm going to support that as best as I can whilst I flatten down the other side. So what we're going to do next is we're going to maintain the shape, and we're going to hammer all the way up to where it would sit in the earlobe. And again, if you hold this in position very firmly by pressing down at the 2 points, then it shouldn't change shape too much as you work hard on it. So I'm just going to shift this around to make sure that I can flatten all of the sections that I may not have been able to get to because my fingers were in the way. So what I want to show you now is what happens to your wire when you're working on this kind of satin finish steel block. On the face that we are striking with the hammer, you end up with kind of a beaten effect, but on the far side you get a satinized imprint from where the steel block was ground so that it would be nice and smooth. Now I actually like both of those faces, but what I tend to do is turn the item over and hammer it on the other side as well. This means it kind of looks identical from both sides, because in this design people will be able to see both sides, and rather than worry that I'm getting it symmetrically with one face being the silken effect from the block side and the other side being the hammered effect, I would rather they both look the same. But obviously you can use that to your advantage, and you'll be able to see, just flip one over on the other side and hammer it only from the one side if that's the effect that you're looking for. So now we've got a nice symmetrical shape here. The reason I don't want to hammer too much over the top where it sits inside the lobe is that I don't want it to become uncomfortable for wear. Now, most piercings are created round, and the most comfortable form to wear in an ear piercing, certainly in the lobe, is to have that round shape. What I'm going to do now is very, very gently tap with the brass side of my hammer throughout the remainder of the design, and I'm striking it repeatedly but very, very gently. And what this will do is give it a little bit of strength, but it shouldn't affect its overall appearance and its overall shape very much. So again, before I get going, I'm just going to support the form and bit by bit hammer down to make sure that I'm not changing the shape. So the act of repeatedly striking with my brass hammer is realigning all of those excited copper electrons, I believe. I'm not a scientist, but that's how I understand it. And it's making them line up in stronger bonds. It does, in fact, weaken your material over its lifespan, but it also strengthens it in the short term. So what we don't want to do is strike it too many times, or it will go beyond the point of wearability. Now I'm just going to pick this up and give that a bit of a check to make sure that I'm happy with its rigidity. If you do have a piercing that will accept a 1mm wire, and many of us do, then please do use a 1mm gauge wire, because it is much stronger in wear in a design like this. But I wanted to share this design because it doesn't take very much wire up, and it's a great way to get used to hammering and the effect that you can have on wire. We're used to seeing people hit sheet, and you may be concerned about hitting wire with your hammer. The hammer that I'm using is a jeweler's hammer. It does in fact have a brass head and on one side and a nylon head on the other side, which you could also use. The nylon head is there to reduce surface scuffing. Obviously I'm working with a silver plated copper right now, so to reduce the chance of flaking or stripping off that coating, the nylon head is a really good choice, but I really like working with the brass head. I've had this hammer for a very long time and it doesn't let me down. So that is what your earring segment should look like, and all you need to do is slip on the chosen charm, and that will sit there quite nicely whilst in wear. It's not got anywhere to go. As I say, you can put on pretty much anything you want. I just happened to find this on my workbench before I started this demo. I think it would be quite cute to have the round section of a toggle clasp. You could even set a gemstone in the centre with a small piece of wire if you wanted to. You could have them interchangeable. You could make this in sterling silver, and then all of your charms in plated metal to keep your prices down. Make it in our argentinium so that you have that hypoallergenic, or make it in my niobium, or whatever material you choose that you feel is acceptable for your lobe piercing. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed today's demo. I'm just going to put this earring back together, like so, and see if I can pop it in on the other side and see what you think they look like. And I'm not very good at putting these in without a mirror, but there we go. I think they're really pretty, they're really simple, they're a fast make, they only take about 6 or 7 minutes if you're not waffling on like I am today. I hope you've enjoyed the demonstration. Thank you so much for continuing to watch. I look forward to catching up with you again very, very soon. Thanks, bye for now.